The afternoon sun cast a faint glow over Washington, D.C. Karoline Leavitt, 27 years old, the youngest White House press secretary in history, was resting in her luxurious apartment near the White House. The small silver cross on the collar of her navy blue blazer, a mark of faith from New Hampshire, glimmered as she stood up. Suddenly, her phone rang. President Trump was calling. "Caroline," his voice was urgent. "There's a religious case at the D.C. local court. A group of Christians is suing because they were banned from praying in public. Go now, observe, report." He left her no time to think. Caroline's tidy apartment reflected her discipline. Documents neatly stacked, business attire prepared in advance. Today, she opted for a simpler style: blazer, white shirt, black pants, but still wore the cross out of habit. As Trump's spokesperson, she was used to handling crises, but this was different. It touched her personal faith. Caroline quickly jumped into her sleek black SUV, speeding through the crowded traffic. NPR blared the news, but she turned it off, focusing on the unexpected task ahead. The D.C. local court was stifling and chaotic. The crowd's murmurs rang out like an off-key symphony, citizens awaiting minor cases, traffic violations, contract disputes, mixed with the clacking of keyboards from the clerk's corner. She glanced at her watch, 2:53 p.m. Just a few minutes remained before the religious case hearing began, the one Trump wanted her to monitor closely. Caroline chose a hard wooden chair in the middle row, set down her document bag, and opened her phone to take notes. The silver cross on her neck glimmered under the fluorescent lights, but she didn't notice the eyes around the room fixating on her. The courtroom wasn't large, but its clutter made it feel oppressive. A middle-aged man in a t-shirt, printed with "I am king," sat a few seats away, fiddling with his phone. To her right, a young woman wearing an oversized necklace, shinier than a chandelier, whispered to her lawyer. Caroline frowned. Clearly, dress code rules here weren't strict. She focused on her task, documenting details of the Christian group suing the government for banning public prayer in a local park. This was an issue Trump wanted to turn into a symbol for conservatives, and she was his eyes here. The wooden door behind the judge's bench swung open, and Judge Charles Hargrove stepped out. At 62, he carried a rigid demeanor, salt and pepper, hair combed back, wire-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose, and a black robe pressed flat as if just ironed. The crowd fell silent as he sat, his cold, sharp eyes scanning the room. "All rise!" shouted James Wilson, a tall bailiff with a stern face. Caroline stood with the others, phone still in hand, her gaze studying Hargrove. He banged his gavel on the desk, signaling the start of the session. "This is a court of law, not a place to show off personality," he declared, his voice deep but cutting like a knife. Hargrove began calling cases swiftly. A man fined for parking in the wrong spot, $50, no argument. A woman late on rent payments, a light warning. Caroline took notes. Noticing Hargrove ran things like a machine, efficient but cold. She glanced at the man in the "I am king" t-shirt. He stood to present a neighbor dispute, and Hargrove didn't mention his flashy shirt. The woman with the oversized necklace was called up too, no word about her jewelry. Caroline frowned again. Something was off. Then Hargrove's eyes landed on her. He stopped mid-sentence, his hand flipping through papers, stalling. His eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses narrowed as if recognizing something. "Miss Leavitt," he said, his voice icy, but with a hint of hesitation. Clearly having recognized the familiar face from White House press briefings. Caroline looked up, unsurprised, standing with natural composure. The crowd turned to look at her, murmurs rising as a few others recognized her too. "That cross." Hargrove pointed at her neck, his tone rigid. "It doesn't belong here. The courtroom is a neutral place, not somewhere to display faith." Caroline glanced around. No prohibitive sign hung on the walls. "I'm Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary, here to observe a case for work," she replied, her voice clear and confident. "This is a personal item, protected by the First Amendment, violating no rules." Hargrove squinted, his face tightening. "Work? This isn't the place to wear that and cause trouble. The courtroom is neutral, not a church." He banged his gavel again, as if to emphasize his authority. James Wilson, the bailiff, stood near the bench, tilting his head to observe. Mrs. Thompson, the middle-aged court clerk with her hair in a tight bun, stopped typing, glancing at Caroline with curiosity. The man in the t-shirt and the woman with the oversized necklace whispered to each other, clearly surprised that Hargrove didn't notice them. Caroline stood still, gripping her phone tightly. She realized instantly. Hargrove wasn't just targeting her, but the cross itself, a symbol he seemed to despise. "Sir, I have the right to wear it under the First Amendment," she said, her voice calm but firm. Hargrove cut her off immediately. "Don't lecture me on the law. Step up to the bench, now." The crowd held its breath. Karoline took a deep breath. Stepping up to the defendant's stand, her heels clicking lightly on the old wooden floor of the DC local court. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on her. The silver cross on her navy blazer collar glimmered under the lights like a small flame amid an approaching storm. Judge Charles Hargrove sat elevated, his eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses narrowing, further, his face growing red with anger. "So what are you doing here with that thing, Miss Leavitt?" he asked, his voice low but sharp as a razor, clearly trying to maintain an air of authority. "Sir, I'm here on duty and have the right to wear it," she replied, still clutching her phone, her thumb discreetly switching on the recording. Maude Hargrove banged his gavel on the desk, the sound echoing through the room. "I've seen plenty of people like you, thinking faith gives them the right to disrupt anywhere. This is my courtroom, and I say it's not allowed." He leaned forward, gripping the gavel tightly. "Do you know this behavior is contempt of court?" Karoline furrowed her brow, quickly glancing around the room. The man in the size, "I am king." T-shirt sat there unnoticed. The woman with the oversized necklace whispered to her lawyer, ignored. Yet her tiny cross was the problem. "Sir, I'm not disrupting anything," she replied, her voice still steady. "I'm here for work, and my attire doesn't affect anyone. If you have a specific ban, I'd like to see the written rule." Hargrove smirked, a cold, humorless grin. "A rule? I am the rule here. You walked into my courtroom with that, disrespecting the law, and now you dare demand a document?" He banged the gavel again, so hard that Mrs. Thompson, the clerk, stopped typing and looked up with concern. The crowd began to murmur. An older man in the back row shook his head, whispering to his neighbor, "That necklace over there's bigger. Why is no one saying anything?" James Wilson, the bailiff, stood near the bench, tilting his head to observe. He'd worked here 15 years, and Hargrove's focus on Karoline felt familiar. Not the first time he'd seen this bias. Karoline took a deep breath, knowing a direct argument wouldn't sway Hargrove. She chose the long game. "Sir, if I've broken a rule, I have the right to a clear explanation," she said, her hand subtly adjusting her phone to ensure the recording didn't stop. Hargrove sneered, clearly taking her words as a challenge. "Explanation? Here's your explanation. I'm fining you $500 for contempt of court." He banged the gavel a third time, the sound ringing like a final verdict. The crowd gasped. "500?" a young woman whispered to her friend. "Just for a cross?" The man in the chummed, "I am king." T-shirt let out a small chuckle but quickly silenced. Himself as Hargrove glared his way. "You'll pay today before you leave," Hargrove continued, his tone like a lecture. "Maybe this fine will teach you to respect order. This isn't a church, Miss Leavitt, nor a stage for your performance." He leaned back, smug, as if he'd just won an unchallenged fight. Karoline stood still, her sharp eyes fixed on Hargrove. "Sir, I understand your ruling," she said, her voice even but laced with resolve. "But I have the right to ask, why aren't the others in this room with printed shirts, big necklaces fined too?" Hargrove's face flushed, his hand gripping the gavel until his knuckles whitened. "Don't change the subject," he shouted. "You're the only one here bold enough to bring a religious symbol into my courtroom. That's the difference." Karoline nodded slightly, as if confirming her suspicions. She said no more, but her mind was clear. Hargrove wasn't just biased, he was targeting Christian faith deliberately. Mrs. Thompson resumed typing, but her fingers trembled. In her 12 years as Hargrove's clerk, she'd rarely seen him fined so harshly for something so trivial. James Wilson stood near the bench, arms crossed, his glance at Karoline carrying a hint of empathy. He'd watched Hargrove handle hundreds of cases, and this focus on the young woman stood apart. The crowd's whispers grew louder, some sneaking out phones despite the no-filming rule. Karoline stood there, still holding her phone, her mind racing. She knew this wasn't just a fine, it was a chance to expose something bigger. "Are you done, sir?" she asked, her voice soft but cutting. Hargrove frowned, caught off guard by her composure. "Not yet," he replied. "You'll, pay, and I'll move on with..."
"Session. Sit down." Karoline didn't sit. She stepped closer to the bench, resting her hand on its edge, her eyes never leaving Hargrove. "I'll pay," she said, her voice low but brimming with determination. "But we're not done here." Hargrove smirked again, but this time it faltered slightly. Karoline Leavitt stood firm. At the defendant's stand, her gaze locked on Judge Charles Hargrove. The silver cross on her navy blazer collar gleamed. Like a silent challenge, Hargrove had just fined her $500 for contempt of court. His face flushed red with triumph, his hand still gripping the gavel. The crowd in the D.C. local court held its breath, the murmurs fading. Mrs. Thompson, the clerk, stopped typing, her anxious eyes darting between Karoline and Hargrove. James Wilson, the bailiff, stood with arms crossed, tilting his head as if anticipating something bigger. Hargrove broke the silence. "Did you hear me, Miss Leavitt? $500 payable today. Sit down, we have other business." He banged the gavel, signaling an end. But Karoline didn't budge. She took a deep breath, placed her hand on the bench's edge, and spoke, her voice clear, calm, yet sharp as a blade. "Sir, before I sit, I need to clarify a few things for the record." Hargrove frowned, caught off guard by her steadiness. "The record? You've got no right to demand anything here," he snapped, but his voice wavered, as if sensing something coming. Karoline gave a slight smile, not taunting, but the confidence of someone in control. She pulled a small, gold-gleaming card from her document bag and held it up for all to see. "I'm Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary serving under President Donald Trump. But what you don't know, Judge Hargrove, is that I don't just talk well. I know the law deeper than you might think." The crowd gasped. The man in the "I am king" t-shirt gaped. The woman with the oversized necklace whispered to her lawyer. Hargrove froze, his hand on the gavel stilled mid-air. "That doesn't change the fact that you broke my rules," he muttered, his voice fading. But Karoline didn't let him regain his momentum. She stepped closer to the podium, her voice echoing throughout the room. "Your rules or your personal bias? I'm here on the president's orders to observe a religious case, a group of Christians suing for their right to pray in public. This cross," she pointed to her neck, "is my religious freedom, protected by the First Amendment. You fine me for it, but do you know what the law says?" Hargrove's face reddened, trying to push back. "I don't need you teaching me the law. This is my courtroom, and I decide." Karoline cut him off, her voice firmer than ever. "You're wrong, sir. The law isn't yours alone. Let me remind you of Church of Lukumi Babalu Aye vs. City of Hialeah, 1993. The Supreme Court ruled that banning religious symbols without just cause violates the Constitution. Do you have a just cause, or is it just because you don't like do you?" The crowd fell dead silent. A few sneaked phone photos despite the rules. Hargrove opened his mouth but found no words. Mrs. Thompson held her breath, fingers hovering over the keys. James Wilson nodded slightly, eyes alight. He'd seen many cases, but never a defendant flipped the script this fast. Karoline pressed on, her voice like a rehearsed speech. "You fine me $500 for contempt, but I've got proof right here in this room. That man," she pointed to the "I am king" t-shirt wearer, "wears a printed shirt, clearly against dress code, yet you said nothing. Her," she pointed to the woman with the big necklace. "She's got flashy jewelry, but you're silent. Only my cross, a Christian symbol, angered you. That's not law, sir. That's bias." Hargrove trembled, his face shifting from red to pale. You're slandering me," he stammered, his voice weak, unconvincing. Karoline didn't stop. She raised her phone. "I've recorded everything, from when you called me up to now. I've also texted the White House office reporting this injustice. You want to find me? Fine, but this doesn't end here." The crowd erupted in whispers. Someone shouted, "She's right." Another clapped, quickly hushed by James Wilson. Hargrove panicked, grasping for control. "Miss Leavitt, I can withdraw the fine. No need to escalate this." He banged the gavel feebly, his voice shaky. But Karoline shook her head, her gaze unwavering. "No, sir. Withdrawing it because of who I am only proves you're more wrong. The issue isn't me, it's how you run this court. I demand you review the past 6 months' records, all fines tied to religious symbols. And I propose mandatory First Amendment training for court staff, including you." The courtroom exploded. The older man in the back stood clapping, yelling, "That's right." A young woman whispered, "Who is she?" "Amazing." Mrs. Thompson typed furiously, capturing every word, her eyes gleaming as if witnessing history. James Wilson smiled discreetly. He'd known she was special from the start. Hargrove slumped into his chair, face ashen, hands trembling on the gavel. He looked at Karoline, truly seeing her for the first time. Not as a defendant, but as a formidable foe. "You think I'm just a spokesperson?" Karoline said, her voice low but powerful. "But I've worked with President Trump through countless lawsuits, from elections to policy. I taught myself law to defend him, and now I'm using it to defend myself and others. You just made a big mistake, Judge Hargrove." She placed her White House card on the bench, stepped back, her eyes never leaving him. Hargrove opened his mouth but said nothing. He knew he'd crossed someone not just smart, but a legal genius. The crowd erupted again, scattered applause breaking out. Mrs. Thompson typed faster than ever. as if to preserve the moment forever. James Wilson stepped closer to the bench, his eyes full of respect for Karoline. Hargrove sat there, his authority crumbling before everyone's eyes. Karoline stood still, the cross still shining, no longer just a symbol of faith, but her flag of victory. Karoline Leavitt stepped out of the D.C. local court, the late afternoon sun glinting off the silver cross on her navy blazer collar. The clock read 3:30 p.m., but the air inside had just exploded like a bomb. She paused at the glass doors, checking her phone. The recording had been sent to the White House office, along with a brief message to Trump's advisor. Hargrove fined me for the cross. Handled it. Next steps needed. She knew this wasn't just personal anymore. It was a chance for Trump and conservatives to score big. Inside the courtroom, the crowd was still buzzing. The older man in the back turned to his neighbor, voice trembling. "I've never seen anyone knock out a judge that fast." A young woman with her boyfriend whispered. "She's the White House press secretary. Incredible." Mrs. Thompson, the clerk, hurriedly printed the session transcript, her hands shaky as she processed what she'd witnessed. James Wilson, the bailiff, left the courtroom, phone in hand, calling a colleague. "You've got to hear this." A young woman just silenced Hargrove. The news began leaking out, spreading like wildfire through dry grass. Karoline hadn't even reached her car when her phone buzzed wildly. A notification from X. The hashtag Crossing Court was trending. She opened the app and saw the first tweet from someone at the scene. Judge fines White House press secretary $500 for wearing a cross. She fights back with the law, leaves him speechless. Crossing Court. Within 10 minutes, hundreds of comments poured in. "Who is she? Unreal. Hargrove's done." A major conservative account tweeted, "Proof the system's against Christians. Thank you, Karoline Leavitt." She gave a small smile, knowing this wave was just beginning. 3 p.m., President Trump jumped in. He posted from his personal account. "Karoline Leavitt, my amazing spokesperson, just taught a leftist judge a lesson on religious freedom. Legal genius. We won't let them suppress faith." The tweet racked up over 50,000 retweets in 30 minutes. Conservative outlets like Fox News pounced, running headlines. White House press secretary faces off with judge over cross and wins big. Karoline got a call from Trump's senior advisor. "You did great." His voice beamed. "The president wants this amplified. Prep a statement." Meanwhile, Charles Hargrove sat alone in his office behind the bench, dim light casting shadows. On his pale face, his phone rang nonstop. D.C. Judicial Council, reporters, even old colleagues. He silenced it, hands trembling as he held a cold coffee mug. The clash with Karoline hadn't just humiliated him in front of the crowd. It was spreading across the city, he muttered. "She's just a young girl, how did this happen?" But deep down he knew he'd collided with something bigger than himself. Mrs. Thompson Choi, still at the courthouse, couldn't stay quiet. She called a friend at a local paper, voice low but firm. "I've worked with Hargrove 12 years. He always targets religious symbols, especially Christian ones. That girl today was right. I've got notes to prove it." She pulled a small notebook from her drawer, filled with entries of similar cases. People fined heavily for crosses, worn for Islamic badges, while slogan tees and flashy jewelry got a pass. She knew she was taking a risk, but after today, silence wasn't an option. James Wilson took action too. He met colleagues in the courthouse break room, recounting the event with emotion. "I counted at least 20 times Hargrove fined people for religious symbols this year. Rude t-shirts?" He laughs it off. "Leave it exposed, what we all knew but wouldn't say." A colleague nodded. "I'll call the press, this needs to be out there."
By 5 p.m., a Channel 7 news reporter stood outside the courthouse, filming live. Today, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt was fined $500 for wearing a cross in court. She fought back, and now the city's buzzing. On X, Cross in Court soared past 100,000 mentions. People shared their own Hargrove stories. "He fined me $200 for a prayer badge last year. I saw him scold a mom for a cross in a divorce case." A big account posted a short video someone secretly filmed in court, Karoline holding up her White House card, her voice ringing out strong. The clip went viral, hitting 1 million views in hours. Karoline sat in her car, parked on a quiet street corner, watching the news explode. She called her husband, a low-key businessman, her voice calm but excited. "Honey, I just shut down a judge. This is about to get huge." He laughed over the phone. "You always pull off crazy stuff. Stay safe." She nodded, hung up, and Opened an email from Trump's office. Prep for a press conference tonight. We're turning this into a win. At home, Hargrove turned on the TV, seeing his face on the evening news. Judge faces backlash after fining press secretary. Nuttery. The bold headline flashed. He switched it off, hands shaking. The Judicial Council had called, demanding he explain himself. By morning, he knew. His 30-year career was teetering, all because of a 27-year-old and her tiny cross. Next morning, the D.C. Judicial Council's office buzzed like a beehive. News of Karoline Leavitt and Judge Charles Hargrove had swept through Washington, forcing the council to launch an urgent investigation. Linda Martinez, a seasoned investigator with 20 years' experience, stood before a long table spreading out dozens of case files from Hargrove's court. Her team had been working non-stop since 6 a.m. after receiving an official complaint from the White House office, filed by Karoline last night. "We've got 48 hours to report," Linda told, her team, her voice firm. "Find everything tied to Hargrove and religious symbols." Karoline, meanwhile, sat in her White House office, prepping for tonight's press conference at Trump's command. She reviewed the courtroom recording, sending another email to his advisor. "I've got data from X, hundreds accusing Hargrove of bias. Push this hard." Her phone buzzed constantly, messages from lawyers, reporters, and supporters. A law student wrote, "You inspire me. Hargrove fined my mom for a cross once." Karoline smiled, knowing this was no longer just her fight. It had reached thousands. At the courthouse, Mrs. Thompson entered the investigation room, clutching her small notebook. "I've tracked 12 years with Hargrove," she told Linda, her voice shaky but resolute. He always targeted religious symbols, crosses, hijabs, anything standout. But crude shirts or loud jewelry, he let them slide. Linda flipped through the notebook, spotting dozens of cases. September 14, 2024. Man with cross, fined. $300 for disruption. October 20th, 2024. Muslim woman with hijab, fined $200 for inappropriateness. Linda frowned. "This is gold, thank you, Chakri." James Wilson showed up too, offering a handwritten statement. "I've been a bailiff there 15 years, he said. "Hargrove fined people with religious symbols 3 times more than other violations. I counted, once in a day, he hit 5 people for crosses but ignored 3 in vulgar shirts." Linda jotted notes fast, her team cross-checking with official records. The data soon emerged. Over the past year, 70% of religious symbol fines targeted Christians, averaging 200, double the penalty for other dress code breaches. Charles Hargrove, meanwhile, sat in his home office, facing the council via Zoom. "I didn't mean to be biased," he said, his voice weak, hands cradling his head. Linda presented the data. "Mr. Hargrove, records show you fined people wearing crosses 80% more harshly than similar violations. How do you explain that?" Hargrove fell silent, eyes downcast. He recalled Karoline, her steely voice, her sharp reasoning about the First Amendment. "I didn't realize," he mumbled. "I thought I was maintaining order." By noon, Linda's preliminary report was complete. "This isn't just Hargrove," she told the council. "No. We found 3 other D.C. judges with similar tendencies, though milder. But Hargrove is the clearest case. Bias against religion, especially Christianity." The council ordered Hargrove's immediate suspension, pending a final ruling. News leaked out, and X erupted again. Cross in court, Hargrove suspended. Karoline Leavitt shakes the system. A conservative account posted, "Trump's legal genius wins again. Odium." Karoline stood before the mirror in the White House briefing room at 6 p.m., adjusting her blazer, the cross still gleaming. Trump walked in, clapping her shoulder. "You made me proud, Karoline. Tonight we show them religious freedom is untouchable." She nodded, stepping to the podium, camera flashes firing non-stop. "Yesterday, I was fined for wearing a cross. Not because I was wrong, but because a judge thought he was above the law," she said, her voice resonating. "I fought back, not just for me, but for everyone treated unfairly for their faith." The press crowd buzzed, questions flying, but she answered calmly, citing law and X data. Hargrove watched the briefing on TV, hands trembling. He turned it off, sitting in darkness. His phone overflowed with messages, colleagues distancing themselves, reporters hounding him. But what shocked him most was Thompson and Wilson's testimony. People he trusted. He opened his laptop, searching the Church of Lukumi Babalu Aye, ruling Karoline mentioned. Reading it, he sighed. She's right. I was wrong. For the first time in 30 years, Hargrove felt small. He called the council, voice hoarse. I'm resigning, but I want to help fix this. The next day, Hargrove appeared at a small council meeting, no longer in a judge's robe. I didn't see my own bias, he said, eyes red. Karoline Leavitt opened my eyes. I want to join the training, so no one repeats my mistakes. Linda nodded. Noting Hargrove's turning around could be useful, the news spread, sparking debate. Some on X mocked. Hargrove's faking it. But others supported. At least he admits fault. Rare. Karoline, back in her office, got an email from Linda. Hargrove resigned, agreed to train. You changed. Him. She glanced at the cross in the mirror, smiling. The case she'd come to observe, the Christian group suing the government, was now just a small part of a bigger story. She turned an ordinary day into a spark for change, not just for Hargrove, but for the whole system. Just 4 days after the incident. At the D.C. local court, the atmosphere in Washington shifted noticeably. Karoline Leavitt stood in her White House office, gazing out the window at Pennsylvania Avenue. The silver cross on her navy blazer collar still shone, now a symbol of a movement bigger than she'd imagined. Her phone buzzed with messages, from Trump, conservatives, and everyday people thanking her for speaking up. An email from the D.C. Judicial Council had just arrived. New regulations drafted. Thank you, Miss Leavitt. She smiled, knowing this victory wasn't hers alone. After the lightning-fast investigation, the council issued new rules for D.C. courts. No bans on religious symbols unless they genuinely disrupt. All staff, from judges to clerks, must undergo mandatory First Amendment training. Linda Martinez, the lead investigator, stood before the council, stating, "The Hargrove case shows we need more transparency. Training is the first step. Yenshol." A new plaque went up outside the courthouse inscribed, "Religious freedom, a right beyond violation." Karoline saw the news on X, where Cross in Court still trended. D.C. changes laws, thanks to Karoline Leavitt. Charles Hargrove, no longer a judge, appeared at the first training session. He stood before dozens of court staff, voice raspy but sincere. I thought I was fair, but I was wrong. Karoline Leavitt taught me to look at myself. Don't let bias blind you. The crowd was quiet, some nodding. Mrs. Thompson, now appointed to oversee the court's transparency program, sat in the front row taking notes. James Wilson, leading training for court bailiffs, added, "We're the eyes and ears here. If we see injustice, we speak up." Hargrove watched them, knowing he was making amends, a small but necessary step. Karoline hung the $500 fine receipt in a glass frame on her White House office wall. It wasn't just a memento. It was a reminder of one person's power to stand up. Trump walked in, clapping her shoulder. "You're a star, Karoline. The religious freedom crowd loves you, and so do I." He laughed heartily, voice booming. "We just won big. Keep the momentum going." Ta. She nodded, prepping for her next speech at a conservative event in Virginia, where thousands waited to hear the White House's legal genius. The incident's impact stretched beyond D.C. States like Texas, Florida, and Ohio began reviewing their own court rules. Texas's governor tweeted, "Thanks to Karoline Leavitt for reminding us about religious freedom. Texas will follow." A group of Florida lawyers filed for similar training, citing Cross in Court. On X, people posted photos wearing crosses, Islamic badges, or Buddhist bracelets, captioned, "My freedom, no one can ban it." Karoline read these posts, pride swelling. She hadn't expected one courtroom moment to ignite such a movement. The next day, Karoline stood on a stage in Virginia before a crowd of 5,000 waving religious freedom banners. The camera flashes popping, the cross gleaming on her neck. "That day, I just wanted to do my job," she said, voice carrying over the speakers. "But when a judge fined me for my faith, I couldn't stay silent. This isn't just my win, it's ours." The crowd roared with applause, some shouting, "Karoline for president." She smiled, waving, camera flashes popping. The cross gleaming on her neck became a viral image across social media, dubbed by the press as the symbol of resilience. Back in D.C., Mrs. Thompson oversaw new record-keeping, every fine now detailed and checked monthly for bias. James Wilson trained young bailiffs, stressing, "Don't be afraid to speak out." Leavitt did, and so must we. One evening, Karoline got a letter from Linda Martinez. "You didn't just change Hargrove. You changed the system. Thank you." She set it down, eyeing the framed fine receipt, reflecting on the journey, from one unexpected day to this wave of reform. Trump called at 9 p.m. "Karoline, you're my gold," he said. "The opposition's panicking, and we're winning. Rest up, more tomorrow?" She laughed. "Thank you, Mr. President, I'm ready." Hanging up, she sat, touching the cross. From a small accessory, it now lit the path she walked, not just for her, but for millions. 3 months later, Karoline Leavitt stood at the White House podium, camera flashes firing non-stop. The silver cross on her navy blazer collar gleamed, now a familiar symbol to millions. Before her were reporters, TikTokers, and religious community reps, all waiting to hear her speak on religious freedom. 3 months ago, "I just wanted to do my job," she began, voice echoing. "But when a judge fined me for my faith, I stood up, not just for me, but for all of you. Today, we've changed the system." The crowd clapped, some holding "Cross in Court" signs. Outside, the D.C. local court now had a new plaque in its lobby. "Justice honors all faiths." She received a letter from a young law student. "Miss Leavitt, I was scared to fight, but your cross case gave me courage. I'm starting a free clinic for people discriminated against for faith. Thank you." Karoline read it before her mirror, that night, smiling, knowing she'd inspired the next generation. Charles Hargrove, now a volunteer instructor, stood before a training class, saying, "I was wrong once. Leavitt taught me, justice has no room for bias." Mrs. Thompson and James Wilson kept monitoring, ensuring court transparency. Trump called her, "Karoline, you're my warrior. Keep it up." She nodded over the phone, feeling a greater duty than ever. Karoline stepped onto the White House balcony, gazing at D.C. under the sunset. The cross in her hand wasn't just a keepsake, it was the flame she'd ignited, spreading from a small courtroom across America. "Freedom doesn't come free," she whispered. "It takes fighters." A message arrived. The Judicial Council wanted her to lead a national reform commission. She smiled, ready for the next challenge. From one unexpected day, she'd reshaped laws, inspired others, and proved one person, one belief, can shake the world. Final thoughts. The story of Judge fines Karoline Leavitt for wearing a cross only to discover she's a legal genius reflects real tensions in today's U.S. society, especially the clash between personal freedom and systemic power. In the current climate, debates over religious liberty, judicial bias, and social media sway are commonplace. Karoline's fining by Judge Hargrove for her cross mirrors how some public officials impose personal views on the law, a pattern Americans see in lawsuits over religious symbols at schools or public spaces. Her counterattack, grounded in the First Amendment and the Church of Lukumi Babalu I precedent, reminds us the Constitution remains a strong shield for freedom, even against injustice. The Kali Cross in Court. Hashtag exploding on X and Trump's backing show the power of social media and political leadership in amplifying individual voices, a trend widespread in 2025 America. The lesson. It isn't just to stand against wrong, it's how to use knowledge, community, and tech to drive change. Karoline didn't just argue with Hargrove. She recorded, cited law, and rallied a network, from the White House to the public. This teaches us, in modern America, where power can be misused, you need evidence, like her recording. Know your rights, through legal arguments. Harness public support, via social media. Hargrove's shift from oppressor to reformer also shows dialogue, and pressure can turn foes into allies. Be patient, yet resolute. Like Karoline framing her fine receipt as a symbol. Because a small act today can transform the system tomorrow.